Might of the Thoughts, page 2, part 1. All of the following words are the result of the thoughts from a long, turbulent, and full life. But they are also the result of well-maintained meditation, as well as the result of perception, cognition, cognizance, knowledge, practical experience, and living experience and wisdom. However, the words do not claim to represent omniscience in regard to all things, nor consequently are they to be regarded as an exhaustive treatment of the much described life and of the comprehensive topic of the might of the thoughts. The words are much more to be understood as the values of the practical experience and lived experience of a human being who made the effort all his life to examine his thoughts and steer them along neutral positive lines, in the knowledge that all of the human being's might is anchored in his or her thoughts. In this form, many things are also more touched on by the words than explained, but the fundamental zeal or goal of the words is that all human beings are encouraged through them to find the truth and be cognizant of it, so that they begin to live according to the old saying which says, quote, "The human being is the forger of his or her own fortune." And when I refer to all human beings, then all are thereby actually meant, thus children and adults, as well as young and old, and indeed, as it applies to the male gender as well as to the female. Quote, "The human being is the forger of his or her own fortune." And indeed, in the form that the human being forms his or her luck by means of his or her thoughts, in each case according to how he or she chooses them and reinforces them. But thoughts are created in the consciousness. Consequently, this is the origin of all might. A might which forms one's character, as well as one's morality, as well as the external circumstances of life, and the way through the life. The consciousness itself also constitutes the actual personality, and it is exactly this which is responsible for the form and use, that is to say, the utilization, of the thoughts. Consequently, the manner in which the thoughts are to be mightfully used is determined by the consciousness itself, that is to say, by the personality. If a human being is not yet aware of this irrefutable fact, because he or she has lived so far in well-tended unknowledgeness, as well as in ignorance of these matters, and in the pain and suffering, affliction and disadvantage which often results from that, then that human being can now perceive this truth, create cognition and cognizance for himself or herself, as well as knowledge, practical experience, living experience, and wisdom, in order to thereby bring some light, love, peace, harmony, and joy into the life in an honest and lasting form. Not only does the truth have something magical, strong, and mightful about it, but also the thoughts do. Thoughts are might, and indeed in the negative as well as in the positive. However, thoughts must be neither purely negative nor purely positive, but equalized. Indeed, neutral positive equalized. That means that thoughts are certainly maintained in a positive form, but that negative inclusions must also be allowed in them, which are processed together with the positive in a neutral equalized form. Neutral positive equalized thinking therefore means that both positive and negative must be brought together and equalized, whereby a healthy and progressive thinking arises. On its own, negative thinking leads to Ausartung, or the very badly get out of the control of the good human nature, just as much as purely positive thinking does. A necessary ratio, which results through a neutral, positive, equalized form of thinking, must therefore be adhered to. In short, this is simply called, quote, positive thinking, which, however, is not quite correctly defined. Consequently, misunderstandings unfortunately arise from it, which can bring more harm than good. Therefore, it has to be clear that a neutral, positive, equalized mode of thinking is required for the maintenance and repair of the psyche. But a neutral, positive, equalized thinking requires the self-development of the personality, which is based in self-cognition, from which results the self-realization, and indeed, by forming all of that which is recognized about oneself into zeal-directed or goal-directed thoughts, which are then mightfully used, whereby a self-mightification arises in practice. Human beings are thereby able to show themselves their real and true greatness, and in conscious use of the might of their thoughts, they show themselves their own capabilities, and also prove that they have a means at their disposal with which they can form their futures and entire lives according to their own wishes and ideas. The effective truth is never complicated, and in any case it can always be expressed quite simply. And once it has found its way into the openness, and has been or is actually spoken, then it has such a profoundly moving effect that it can no longer be disregarded. And the truth is so strong that it can actually change the life of one human being, or a great mass of human beings. Therefore, it is no empty phrase when it is said that truth can literally make one free. Free from anxieties and from restrictions which the human being imposes on himself or herself, and free from burdens and other things. But the way to the truth lies in the might of the thinking. The might of the thinking is every human being's key to his or her personal power in all things. But this key must be specifically engaged by every human being in order to open the door to his or her own consciousness and its mightful thoughts, in order to make accessible the most comprehensive success and the greatest power which the human being can personally imagine. If the human being demonstrates to himself or herself the might of his or her thoughts, then the truth strikes roots deep in the subconsciousness. Once the simple and yet brightly shining truth of the fact of the might of the thoughts is recognized, then life changes slowly but steadily for the better. Thereby the human being learns to stop doing things which he or she does not want to do in his or her life, but which he or she did up to that point, often without actually knowing why. Once the cognition and knowledge about the might of one's thoughts grows in him or her, then he or she learns to do what suits him or her, what he or she enjoys, and what he or she loves. The sense of the life is discovered, as is the sense that, in one's own personal wise, a better life and a better world for all human beings, as well as for all other life forms, and for all of nature and the planet, must be created. This cognition and this knowledge become the motivating power in one's life, and those human beings who have grasped that are thereby just as happy and satisfied and willing to bear complete responsibility for themselves as they are to carry the responsibility out into the life which surrounds them and to the life forms of all kinds which exist in it. And all human beings who recognize this truth are happy and satisfied that they can share their cognition and their knowledge, as well as their life, with every other human being, and with every other life form. And this goes for men as well as for women, for young and old, for the educated and uneducated, as well as for poor and rich, because the principles are universal and valid for every human being, absolutely regardless of one's faith or upbringing, one's gender or age, or one's race or social status.